Inside his mountain fortress, Adolf Hitler slammed his fist on the oak table so hard that coffee cups rattled. His face, pale and twisted with rage, leaned close over a map of Europe dotted with pins and arrows that no longer made sense. Again and again, the reports screamed the same impossible truth. The Allies were striking where they should not have known to strike. Orders he had given in absolute secrecy were countered almost before they left his desk. To the Führer, the explanation was obvious and chilling. Someone close to him was betraying the Reich, yet what he could not see was that the betrayal he feared was not from generals, ministers, or aides. It came from a silent, invisible mission running thousands of miles away in England, where men and women he would never meet were listening to every whispered order of his war machine. The paranoia had begun quietly, almost imperceptibly. By 1942, Hitler's once near mystical sense of control over his empire was fraying. His armies had stalled in Russia. The Allies were growing stronger in the air. But worse than defeat was the feeling of being preempted. Again and again, Allied bombers found targets hidden in the heart of the Reich. Convoys at sea were ambushed as if someone had whispered their routes to London. Luftwaffe fighter wings, sent out to surprise the enemy, instead found themselves ambushed, their fuel tanks exploding before they even located their prey. To Hitler, these were not the results of ordinary intelligence. No, these were betrayals. He looked around the wolf's lair with suspicion. Every man in uniform seemed suddenly suspect. He accused generals of weakness, incompetence, even treason. He began to believe his enemies did not just exist outside the Reich, but inside it. His own high command, the proud OKW that had once stood as the pillar of German military strength, now seemed riddled with cowards and traitors. The more defeats mounted, the stronger the conviction grew. His empire was being undone from within, but far from the forests of East Prussia, in an old British mansion filled with clattering typewriters and the hum of primitive computers, another war was unfolding. Bletchley Park, an estate hidden by hedges and secrecy, was the home of an army of code breakers. They had cracked the Enigma, the supposedly unbreakable cipher machine used by the Germans to transmit their most secret orders. With each intercepted signal, the Allies peeled back the layers of German strategy. Convoys were rerouted before U-boats could find them. Luftwaffe squadrons were trapped before they could strike. Tanks rolled into traps set days in advance. And because the Allies carefully disguised the source of their knowledge, it never appeared to come from broken codes. To Hitler, it looked like betrayal. By 1943, the effect of this invisible mission had become unmistakable. In the Atlantic, Admiral Donitz's wolf packs were being slaughtered. German submarines left port expecting to stalk prey, only to vanish beneath explosions before they reached their hunting grounds. Dönitz himself reported in disbelief that the Allies seemed to know U-boat routes in advance, as if the ocean itself had turned against them. Hitler raged at the Navy, convinced that his admirals were leaking secrets, perhaps bribed by the British. Yet the truth was that every time a submarine commander tapped out his orders on Enigma, men at Bletchley Park were already reading them. The paranoia spread deeper into the Führer's headquarters. In North Africa, Erwin Rommel had been forced to retreat again and again, his supply convoys destroyed before reaching the front. Hitler accused the Desert Fox of weakness, but Rommel himself suspected something darker. He wrote privately that the Allies seemed to anticipate his moves with uncanny precision, as though, he said, "They are inside my headquarters." To Hitler, these words confirmed his darkest suspicion. If Rommel himself could not explain it, then someone within Rommel's staff must have been leaking. Distrust corroded even the most loyal bonds. In the east, on the vast plains of Russia, the same story unfolded. Entire German offensives collapsed before they began. Orders to shift divisions were countered with Soviet attacks that seemed perfectly timed. Hitler shouted at his generals, calling them traitors, accusing them of leaking plans to Moscow. He dismissed and humiliated them one after another. Von Rundstedt, Guderian, Manstein, men who had built Germany's early victories were now cast aside, their reputations crushed under the weight of suspicion. Hitler saw only betrayal, never realizing that far away in Bletchley Park, British women with headphones and pens were scribbling down his secrets as easily as if they had been handed to them. The walls of paranoia closed tighter with each month. Hitler's inner circle shrank and trust evaporated. His generals no longer dared to speak frankly. His commanders no longer dared to question orders. A culture of fear smothered the Reich's military machine, and yet the defeats continued. For Hitler, there was no other explanation. Someone in his house, perhaps many, were betraying him. But the truth was worse for his pride than betrayal ever could be. His empire was being outsmarted by an invisible enemy who had never stepped foot inside Germany. By late 1943, this unseen mission had done more than bleed Germany of victories. It had sown seeds of doubt that crippled the Führer's ability to command. Hitler believed he had moles in the Wehrmacht, spies in the Navy, traitors in the Luftwaffe. He fired trusted commanders, spread fear through his ranks, and replaced men of experience with sycophants who pledged loyalty but lacked skill. Every decision he made, every outburst of rage, was colored by the belief that someone close to him was feeding the Allies his plans. And still, in Bletchley Park, the mission continued. Silent and relentless, the codebreakers listened, translated, and handed the intelligence to Allied commanders who shaped it into victory. They never revealed their secret. They never boasted of their triumphs. To the men and women of that hidden mansion, the war was fought in silence. Their victories measured in the paranoid rants of a dictator who could not understand why his empire was collapsing. By the dawn of 1944, Hitler no longer trusted anyone completely. He gave orders in fragments, splitting commands between departments so no single man could know the full picture. He staged tests, feeding false information to see if the Allies would act on it. When they did, his paranoia exploded into fury. He shouted at his generals, accusing them of treason, screaming that the Reich was bleeding because of betrayal. The irony was complete. The Allies had broken his codes, but Hitler himself had broken his own army by no longer believing in it. The spring of 1944 brought with it the most elaborate deception of the war. Operation Fortitude. To the outside world, it was nothing more than a whisper, a phantom army, a stage set built on the shores of Britain. Inflatable tanks, wooden aircraft, fake radio chatter, entire divisions that existed only on paper. But to Hitler, who was already drowning in paranoia, it became the final proof that betrayal lurked within his own command. For when the Allies struck at Normandy on June 6th, Hitler refused to believe it was real. He was certain the main blow would fall at Pas-de-Calais. Why? Because his own intelligence reports, his own advisors, confirmed what the Allies had carefully planted. The deception worked, not just because the Allies were cunning, but because Hitler's faith in his own officers had already been shattered. The landings at Normandy should have been the moment for decisive German counterattack. Divisions lay in wait, tanks ready to roll. But Hitler hesitated. His mind turned in circles of suspicion. Were his generals urging him to move because they truly saw the threat? Or were they part of the betrayal, trying to lure him into exposing his reserves? He delayed for precious hours, demanding more proof, demanding certainty. And in those hours, Allied forces clawed their way off the beaches, establishing a foothold that would never be dislodged. To the soldiers on the ground, it was bravery and sacrifice that carried the day. But behind the scenes, it was Hitler's paranoia, fed by years of unseen Allied missions, that froze his hand when it mattered most. Even as the Allies advanced across France, Hitler clung to his belief that the betrayal came not from outside, but from within. He called in his generals, demanding explanations for every failure. Why had the Atlantic Wall failed? Why had panzer divisions not moved? Each explanation, each excuse sounded to him like another lie. He replaced commanders almost weekly, stripping veterans of their posts and promoting younger men whose only qualification was obedience. The result was chaos. Orders were delayed, counterattacks poorly coordinated, and armies that had once moved with machine-like precision now stumbled like a body whose nerves had been severed. The unseen mission at Bletchley Park had not only stolen Hitler's secrets, it had poisoned his faith in the very structure of command. By autumn 1944, the cracks in the Reich were gaping wounds. The Allies had crossed into Germany itself. Cities burned nightly under waves of bombers, and still the intelligence leaks continued. U-boat bases were destroyed, fuel depots vanished in flames, railways shattered by precision strikes. Hitler raged that his enemies knew everything, every movement, every shipment, every deployment. He screamed at his staff, accused them of treachery, and demanded executions for traitors who did not exist. He sent the Gestapo sniffing through the ranks, arresting officers on the flimsiest suspicion. Men who had served faithfully for years found themselves dragged away, condemned not by evidence, but by the paranoia of a leader who could not see the truth. But the truth was there, invisible and relentless. Each time a German commander clicked the rotors on an Enigma machine, he believed he was wrapping his orders in unbreakable armor. Each time he tapped out coordinates, fuel requests, or troop deployments, he was unwittingly delivering them into Allied hands. Bletchley Park turned those signals into maps, into timetables, into targets. They handed them to Eisenhower, to Montgomery, to Patton. The Allies struck with uncanny precision, and Hitler blamed betrayal. He was right to feel hunted, but wrong about where the hunter lay. The Battle of the Bulge became the final cruel twist. In December 1944, Hitler launched a desperate counteroffensive through the Ardennes. He believed secrecy would be his weapon, surprise his salvation. For once, he thought the Allies would be caught off guard. But even here, the code breakers were watching. Allied commanders intercepted signals that revealed German fuel shortages, troop movements, and even the outlines of the attack itself. When the offensive began, the Allies reeled, but they did not collapse. Reinforcements moved with uncanny speed. Air power struck when the skies cleared. The German thrust faltered, starved of fuel, hammered from the air. And once again, Hitler saw only betrayal. He shouted that someone had leaked his plans, that traitors in his staff had robbed him of victory. He could not grasp that the betrayal was mechanical, mathematical, impersonal, the silent turning of gears in machines he had dismissed as irrelevant. As winter closed in, Hitler's world shrank to a bunker, and his suspicions consumed him. He no longer trusted his generals, his ministers, not even the few who remained closest to him. He dismissed reports that contradicted his wishes, accused his staff of lying when they brought him bad news, and demanded absolute obedience even as his empire crumbled. The unseen mission had done more than bleed Germany's armies. It had fractured the mind of the man who led them. Every whisper, every shadow, every delay in response looked to him like treason. By then, the war was already lost. But for Hitler, the final blow was not defeat in battle. It was the belief that he had been betrayed from within. The irony is that in all his fury, he never suspected the truth. He never imagined that a group of mathematicians, linguists, and ordinary clerks, hidden away in a British mansion, had unraveled his empire. He never knew that the betrayal he saw in every corner of his command was really the echo of typewriters at Bletchley Park, where men and women worked night and day, turning his most guarded secrets into tools of his destruction. For him, paranoia became reality, and reality became madness. And in that madness, he dragged his empire to ruin. The guns of Normandy still thundered in Hitler's mind long after the beaches were lost. But it was the aftermath, the slow, strangling advance across France that tore apart his faith in the German war machine. Orders he gave were twisted in execution. Counterattacks collapsed before they began. Supply lines that should have been secure vanished under Allied bombs, as though invisible hands guided them. He stared at maps where divisions once proudly marked the front, now gone, wiped away in weeks. To him there was only one explanation: betrayal. Someone, somewhere, was feeding his enemies. The summer of 1944 was a season of humiliation. Paris was abandoned. German columns streamed eastward in retreat, hounded from the skies. Every move they made seemed anticipated. Convoys destroyed before they arrived. Reinforcements struck on the road. Even his vaunted panzer divisions, the steel spearheads of the Reich, were thrown into battle only to be cut apart, as if the enemy had been waiting for them. It was the fruit of Ultra, the secret mission hidden behind layers of silence. Yet Hitler never learned its name. He could not believe machines and mathematicians had cracked his armored cipher. Instead, he turned his rage on the men around him. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, commander in the West, dared to tell Hitler that the war could no longer be won. He was dismissed. General Guderian, father of the Panzer Force, argued for withdrawal to save troops. He was shouted down. General after general walked into Hitler's office with grim reports, only to be branded cowards, defeatists, or worse, traitors. The more his empire faltered, the more he demanded absolute loyalty, not reason. The unseen Allied mission was achieving more than tactical victories. It was sowing distrust like poison into the veins of the Reich. The paranoia deepened as the front collapsed toward Germany's own borders. Hitler issued orders that no one dared question, even when they defied reality. Cities were to be held to the last man, retreats forbidden. Reinforcements sent to units that no longer existed. His staff dutifully carried out these commands, knowing they would lead to slaughter, because to resist was to invite his suspicion. To Hitler, obedience had become the only currency of loyalty. Competence no longer mattered. Truth no longer mattered. Only faith in him. The secret mission at Bletchley Park had broken the chain of command without ever firing a shot. By autumn, Hitler's suspicion had become an obsession. He began reading reports with the eye of a detective, searching for patterns of betrayal. Why had one convoy reached its destination while another had been annihilated? Why had one division broken under pressure while another had fought on? He demanded interrogations. He demanded purges. His generals lived in fear of being branded conspirators. And in July 1944, when a bomb exploded at his East Prussian headquarters, his darkest fears were confirmed. The July 20th plot was not merely an assassination attempt. It was, to Hitler, the proof that betrayal surrounded him. He survived the blast, scarred and shaken, but alive. Yet his survival only fed his paranoia. He looked at the men who saluted him, who pledged their loyalty, and he wondered which of them would try again. The fact that many plotters had been officers, men of rank and respect, destroyed what little trust he still held in the Wehrmacht. From that moment, Hitler ruled less as a commander and more as a tyrant caged by suspicion. Generals were dragged away to prison, some executed, some humiliated before their peers. The officer corps, once the pride of Germany, was gutted by fear. What Hitler did not know was that the Allies rejoiced at his paranoia. The July 20th plot, though it failed, did the work of 10 armies. A paranoid Führer was as useful as any weapon. He no longer coordinated with clarity. He second-guessed every suggestion. He fought battles against shadows, accusing his own people while his real enemies closed in. The secret mission of Ultra did not just win battles on maps, it dismantled the mind of the man who held the reins of power. Winter came, and with it the Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last gamble. He placed all his hopes on secrecy, on a lightning strike that would divide the Allies and force them to the negotiating table. But the same invisible hands that had haunted him for years were waiting. The codebreakers had read the hints, seen the build-up, measured the movements. When the German attack came, it was fierce, brutal, and for a moment it seemed to break through. But fuel shortages strangled the advance. Allied reinforcements poured in with uncanny speed. And as the offensive collapsed, Hitler raged, not at the brilliance of his enemies, but at the betrayal he saw within his own house. He accused commanders of treason, of leaking plans, of conspiring to rob him of his final chance. By the end of the Ardennes, Hitler's world was a narrowing cage of distrust. He no longer believed in victories. He believed only in betrayal. He spent long nights poring over reports, not to plan strategy, but to search for lies. He reshuffled commanders endlessly, promoted sycophants, silenced dissent. Each day the Reich grew weaker, not just from bombs and shells, but from the suffocating grip of suspicion. The Allies pressed closer to the heart of Germany, while the Führer looked inward, convinced the knife in his back was sharper than the swords at his throat. Berlin, 1945. The once mighty Reich was now a bleeding carcass, its borders collapsing under the weight of advancing armies. The Soviets poured in from the east, the Americans and British from the west. Cities that had once been the pride of Germany lay in rubble. Trains no longer ran. Fuel no longer flowed. Yet in the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler clung to one conviction above all: he had been betrayed. The losses, the disasters, the humiliations, none of them in his mind were the fault of flawed strategy or overwhelming Allied might. They were the result of treachery. To him, the knives were always inside, not outside. He pored over maps in the dim bunker light, his hand trembling as he jabbed at front lines that barely existed. He barked orders to divisions that were shadows, to armies that had melted away. When those orders failed, when the Soviets continued their relentless drive into the city, he turned his rage inward. His generals had betrayed him. His ministers had betrayed him. Even the German people, he claimed, had failed him by being too weak. To Hitler, defeat was not the product of an enemy's brilliance, but of his nation's betrayal. He died believing that, but the truth was stranger and infinitely more devastating. There had been betrayal, yes, but not by the men around him. It had come from a place he could not see, a place he never even suspected. From the quiet rooms of Bletchley Park, where men and women in worn-out uniforms deciphered his commands before his armies could even move. From typewriters and logic machines that read the enigma, his unbreakable cipher, as if it were a child's puzzle. Every secret he believed locked away had flowed into Allied hands. Every movement, every plan, every desperate gamble had been anticipated. The secret mission of Ultra had broken him without his knowing. It had whispered in the ears of his enemies while convincing him that his own house was rotten. Even in his final days, the effects of that unseen hand guided his collapse. When he demanded counterattacks, they were crushed by Allied air power that seemed to know exactly where and when to strike. When he ordered reinforcements, they walked into ambushes laid with uncanny precision. When he trusted his most secret communications, they were already in the hands of men who planned his downfall. Hitler never grasped it. He preferred to believe in ghosts, in traitors, in knives in the dark. He never understood that the betrayal was mathematical, cold, silent. Not treason of the heart, but treason of the machine. And so the Reich fell not just from bombs and bullets, but from information, from silence broken, from secrets stolen. In the rubble of Berlin, Hitler's empire crumbled while he raged against shadows. He had been betrayed, but not by his generals, not by his people. By a mission so secret it would remain hidden for decades after his death. A mission that made him think the enemy was inside his own walls, when in truth the enemy was listening from far away, turning his own weapons against him. In May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Hitler lay dead in his bunker, his body burned in the garden above, his empire gone. Yet the secret that had haunted him most was never revealed to him. He never knew that the Allies had been reading his thoughts in real time, that the suspicions consuming him had been carefully nurtured by a hidden hand he could not touch. The men and women of Bletchley Park carried their silence for decades, bound by oaths of secrecy. Only in the 1970s did the world learn what Hitler never did, that a secret mission had stolen the beating heart of the Reich's war machine, and in doing so convinced its leader that betrayal lurked in every shadow. The twist of history is cruel. Hitler had always preached the myth of the stab in the back, the legend that Germany lost the First World War, not on the battlefield, but through betrayal at home. In the Second World War, he lived that myth himself. He died certain that he had been stabbed in the back again. And in a way he was, but not by his people, not by his generals, by the invisible work of strangers who broke his codes and turned his paranoia into madness. The secret mission that made Hitler think he was betrayed was never revealed to him. It lived in silence, in shadows, in the quiet confidence of those who knew they had changed the war. The Führer died blind to the truth, consumed by suspicion, certain of treachery. The final irony: his empire was not undone by traitors in his ranks, but by an invisible enemy who never once set foot inside his bunker, yet made him believe betrayal was everywhere, and so history turned on a secret he never saw, on a mission he never suspected, on a betrayal that was not betrayal at all. The war ended not just with the fall of Berlin, but with the triumph of silence over rage, of mathematics over myth. Hitler's paranoia consumed him, but the secret mission that planted that paranoia in his heart lives on as one of the greatest shadows of the war, a shadow that changed the course of history without ever stepping onto the battlefield.